And good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you for making the time in meeting with us. We wanted to start this meeting just by saying thank you for all the support that we have received throughout the last year, not only from the LA Housing and Community Access Department, but also from the different agencies and individuals who have supported us through all the process. I'm gonna have to share my screen. Sorry. Just a few acknowledgments before we begin. As I mentioned, the City of Los Angeles Housing Plus Community Investment Department, they have been really helpful and supportive throughout this process and giving us creative freedom in terms of creating something that's going to be effective in order to provide better or more enhanced housing services. And I also want to take the time to thank our agency, APLA Health, that also have provided a lot of support throughout this process. On today's agenda, what I'm going to talk about is first of all, talk about who we are as a program. Because even though we do come from APLA Health, we are not the same as the housing department that Bill Brown is working under. I'm going to talk about some brief background, talking about what is the whole purpose of this overview or why are we even meeting today, and talking about what are some of the potential benefits and challenges that you might be facing with this certification program. I'll be going into details in terms of what are the different activities that are needed within the certification program, and that we'll be asking your housing specialist as we go through the different activities what they will be required to attend, and even what are some of the scores that we'll be seeking in order to get them to pass through the next activities. And that will make more sense once I present the model. Then we will talk about what are some of the possible next steps. Before I continue, I would encourage you at this time to mute your phones if possible, just so that we can get rid of the background noise. At the end of the presentation, I'll try to have some time to include questions and answers, so that if you have any type of questions, you are more than free to ask me questions regarding the certification program. If you have any questions, if any of your questions seem to be more related to contractual agreements, I'm going to defer that back to your funder, to the LA Housing Plus Community Investment Department. Bless you. So, out of the housing certification staff, housing specialist certification staff, who's involved in this process? And these are names that you're going to be seeing throughout the next year and hopefully through the many years to come. First of all, our boss, Jeff Bailey, who is the director of HIV Access and Community Based Services. Most of you are already familiar with him. My supervisor, Miguel Chion, who is the associate director of HIV Access and Community Based Services, and as well as myself, Oscar Marquez, and I'm the SIBA Resource Development Manager for our capacity building programs. So, why did we propose this type of certification process? First, as you know, from all of our colleagues in LA, APLA has been implementing housing services for quite some time. So we have a few years of experience under our belt, and Bill Brown has been able to apply a successful model in terms of providing housing services in a more holistic manner, so to guarantee more housing stability for our clients. And in addition to that, our program, the capacity building program, has been doing the capacity building, and I'm referring to us as SIBA program. Our capacity building assistance program has been providing national capacity building services for more than 12 years already. I would say this is our 13th year, and we have implemented a capacity building framework that I'm going to be referring back to this once we get more into the presentation. In addition to that, we have also developed a lot of resources that, even though they were geared towards HIV prevention, a lot of them are applicable to what the housing specialists will need in order to build their skills or enhance their knowledge to provide housing services. Among some of the expertise that we carry through the program are those of housing services, HIV navigation services. Our program was selected among many to develop the national curriculum for HIV navigation services for CDC. So we're one of the partners for that. We also have the 101 core competencies, which sort of comes not necessarily to substitute, but to supplement the motivational interviewing techniques training. We also have other resources relating to mental health and substance use screening, as well as the use of social networks for recruitment. So these are just some of the resources that we have on hand. We have a lot more resources that we can share with you at a later time, but we just wanted to give you a glimpse of how what we were bringing to the table. So let me talk about the background in regards to the housing specialist certification process. The purpose, first of all, is that for this particular overview, is we wanted to make sure that all of you had a better understanding of what the certification program entails. We feel that by you having a greater understanding of the certification program, you would be better positioned to support your staff or your housing specialist to provide the services that they need. In this way, you can also identify potential opportunities for us to work with you in terms of either identifying additional trainings or technical assistance. The other component for the purpose of this particular overview is so that we can try to identify some of the benefits of the organization who are going to be going through this process. So let's talk about first those opportunities. What is the first opportunity that we're going to be seeing here? Well, when it comes to housing services, this is one of the first, if not the first certification of its kind. We have developed a model that hopefully is going to bring a standardized understanding of what the housing specialists are going to be conducting with their clients. And this is not about just linking folks to housing services, but also how do you prepare your clients to be to have housing stability. So once they have reached the referral, once they have reached the housing services, how can you equip them in order to be able to maintain the housing? So with this, what we're bringing forward is a new housing model that it's going to be systematic, but at the same time, it's going to be something that it's going to be very fluid. And this hopefully gives the vision for housing specialists as to how they're going to be conducting different activities. Some of the benefits about this particular program is that we're going to be creating a baseline understanding of the housing services. I know that because we're so spread out through LA County, a lot of times because of the availability of resources or because of or the context or the environments that we work on, we all have a different understanding. They might be a similar, but we all have different understanding of what housing services are. So we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page about what housing services are, so that if my client at APLA Health decides to go to the Antelope Valley, that they are receiving the same type of services in a consistent manner. Also, we wanted to make sure that we increase the understanding of housing specialists about their roles and responsibilities. One of the most common things that we heard throughout the last year is that there's a lot of burnout by housing specialists because they are investing a lot of themselves. So we want to make sure that by establishing these roles and responsibilities, that we're also teaching them how to take care of themselves. That they're also acknowledging what are they going to be their limitations within the scope of providing housing services. And as I mentioned before, to make sure that no matter where a client goes in LA County, that there is a consistent message being given by the different housing specialists. So now that we have seen the opportunities about the housing certification program as well as the benefits, so what does the certification program entail? The goal for APLA, as we understood it last year, was to develop, pilot, and provide certification program for housing specialists to improve the delivery of housing services. So based with this premise is how we created the certification program. Before I go any further, I want to let you know that all the materials have been developed and they are in a draft form. So starting next year, next fiscal year, which starts next week already, we're going to be talking about piloting all these elements with your housing specialist, and we can have an opportunity to talk more about that at the end of the overview. So the first thing to know about how we created this particular certification program, how we got our guiding principles in terms of providing capacity building, not just for trainings or certification programs, is to make sure that we're using something that that it's going to be measurable, and in a way also that we're creating an impact. We don't want your housing specialist to come to the training and not take anything from this. So part of our process is that we believe that in order to increase capacity of those who of the housing specialists, we also have to raise their competencies, and as well as they have to apply it throughout time or practice those competencies. So this is what it means. Competencies basically means that the housing specialists are able to adapt all the learning from the trainings into their own services. So taking all the skills building, all the knowledge that they're taking from the certification process, and being able to implement it with their clients. We know that if they're not taking that and practicing it over time, then eventually they're gonna lose their learning. So our goal in raising capacities is that not only are they able to adapt the learning, but that they're also practicing it over time. And this is the framework that we're using in order to increase the capacity of housing specialists implement housing services. So throughout our relationship with you, our professional relationship with you, you're going to be seeing this framework a lot. And that is basically that capacity equals competencies times practice. Because essentially, we want that whatever the housing specialists are learning, that they're practicing over time, with the hopes that as they practice more and more, they're going to be enhancing their skills and knowledge. So part of the process of how we developed the housing certification program was we needed to start take a step back and not assume what was going on with the housing services. So we wanted to make sure that we were taking a closer look at the housing services characteristics. Also, based on those observations and based on the proposal that we put forward, that we knew and identified what were the knowledge and skills required by housing specialists, because essentially that would yield the certification housing specialist program. So what do we know based on assumptions that we can make based on experiences that we had? We know that we have our clients and that we have created all of these services that are around. And we know, for example, here we have the example of housing services. However, for some reason, our clients are not accessing the different services, including housing services. So we know that there are some things that are preventing them from them accessing the services. And in our work, we have seen that a lot of what the client is bringing is a lot of lack of knowledge. In some cases, they're going to be dealing with mental health issues or substance use. They're going to have internalized homophobia. They're going to have isolation, or perhaps other components that, at the individual level, is going to be preventing them from accessing these services. So that in itself is creating some type of barrier in them accessing services. But we know that the client himself or herself are not the only ones providing the barriers. It is also the structural system that is bringing additional challenges for the clients to access services. In some cases, it might be the lack of transportation, it might be discrimination, lack of housing, it might be lack of knowledge, lack of community services, poverty. So the housing specialist, essentially their work is to basically work through all those barriers in order to break through and make the pathway for the clients to be able to access these services. And the theory that we use for this, sorry, my computer has frozen, sorry. The theory that we have used for this is the social ecological model. And what does this tells us? What this is telling us is that a client is coming in and we're seeing the client, and the client is bringing in a lot of information with them, whether it is barriers to them accessing housing, or whether it is to reaching barriers to reaching stability, housing stability. We also know that the client himself or herself are not didn't just come up with these barriers on their own. A lot of times they're influenced by the other systems that they're interacting with. So every system that they're interacting with is going to create some type of influence on the client. And I chose just an example here of what the social ecological model does. So, for example, we have a client who's coming in to see us. They're also interacting with the friends and family. They're also interacting with us, the housing specialists, with the housing authority, with other funders, and they're also dealing with the politics or environment. So, when we think about the client and the interaction or the messages that they're receiving from all of these systems, think about how that's shaping the client's decision making process. And it's important to note that because as a housing specialist, what we're going to be dealing with, even though we're working with the client, we're going to have to be assessing for all of these elements and how they're affecting or enabling the client to access services. In some cases, for example, if we're talking about the social networks of the client, let's talk about what are the influences that these social networks have on the client. Are they supporting the fact that the client might be able to get housing or might be able to get a job in order to reach housing stability? Or are they doing the contrary? Are they deterring the client from accessing services? As a housing specialist, are we making the services easier and more accessible for the clients, or are we ourselves creating barriers by not meeting the client at the times that they're available, at the places where they might be available? So, thinking about all of these systems, this is what we took into consideration when designing the certification process. Because, in essence, this is going to be guiding how we're assessing and not only assessing, but working with the client. And while this housing specialist might not necessarily have a direct influence in all of these elements, because, for example, the housing specialist might not be able to affect the policy or the environment because there isn't enough housing or because the laws are prohibiting certain certain members of the community to access free housing. While a housing specialist is not able to influence that, what we are able to do, or we should be able to do, is work with the client to identify ways in that the client is able to work throughout this process so that eventually they are able to reach housing stability. So we started with the housing services characteristics. Uh, so now that we have the theoretical framework, we started looking at, so what is the logic model behind that? What is it that we want to achieve with providing housing services? And essentially, we want clients to achieve permanent housing, and that's the long term. In the medium term, which is what we're going to be working on from the housing specialist perspective, is that the client is able to maintain housing as well as they are able to increase their housing stability and self-sufficiency. And how we're going to be achieving this is by providing rental assistance or housing assistance, as well as addressing the housing and address other psychosocial factors that might be affecting housing. So it was important for us to acknowledge this in order for us to create a program that was going to be addressing the skills and knowledge of housing specialists to be working with clients in this type of logic model. So when it came to the knowledge and skills, we already had the logic model in terms of what we wanted to achieve with housing. But when it came to the knowledge and skills, our job was made easier because the LA Housing and Community Access Department gave us the topics in terms of what they wanted us to cover for during the certification process. So taking in consideration the previous logic model and taking in consideration all these different topics that we need to cover, the next step that we did is we divided those topics into knowledge and skills. And the way we did that is by identifying, well, first of all, what does what does it entail to have what is the information that they need versus what are the things that they need to practice, what are the activities that they need to practice, do they need to practice one-on-one services versus do they need to know the background about HAPWA and program and regulations. And we did this so that we can design something that was more adaptable for the needs of housing specialists, where we didn't have to have housing specialists in a classroom for 5 or 7 days, but rather we can try to cover as much of the knowledge online so that we can take care of the skills building activities during the face-to-face component. So essentially what we came up with was the housing services model. What we're going to be teaching during the housing certification program is this particular model. This is what the housing specialists are going to be implementing, and which is essentially four steps. The first steps talks about the recruitment. Recruitment does not necessarily mean the housing specialists are going to be doing outreach. Recruitment refers to how the clients are coming in to our programs, how the housing specialist is having the first contact with the client, and what are the responsibilities of a housing specialist to do when the first meeting a potential client. and that is that they're either going to be getting referrals from other services or agencies, or that the housing specialist is going to be actively trying to recruit folks to come into services. They are going to be assessing the readiness for them to participate in this type of services, as well as to inform what are the different services within the housing that is within their possibilities to provide. The second phase, which is one of the elements that we decided to add, is that of engagement. And before I go into detail about what engagement is, think about when folks are coming into services, they usually go from recruitment onto housing services. However, one of the things that we see, and we can see this even through the Gartner Cascade, the continuum of care, is that while a lot of recruitment might be being conducted and might be able to diagnose a lot of folks, a lot of them also fall out of the system or fall out of care. So this particular step was built in so that we lost the less number of clients as possible. And in engagement in housing services, what we're doing here is not only are we continuing the eligibility assessment, but we're also, as a housing specialist, we're trying to build a rapport with the client, because the clients, what's important for them is to know that they're not a number, that they do count, that they are valued by the agencies, and that we are trying to help them. So how does a housing specialist build that particular professional relationship? And part of how they do that is also by establishing the expectations and agreements. I know that some of the things that I heard from different housing specialists in the past year is that clients will come in with different expectations for what the housing specialist could do. So what we wanted to do here is to make sure that the housing specialist was establishing from the very beginning what were some of the expectations and agreements that they needed to have with the client, such as how they were going to communicate with each other, such as what within their hands are they able to assist the client with, so that the client didn't have these false expectations about these particular services. If the client was in agreement with all of this, then the housing specialist will proceed to enrolling them into services. Now, once this process was conducted, then you would go into the housing services. This is going to be the meat and potatoes of the whole service. And essentially, what the housing services specialist is going to be doing here is, first, they're going to be assessing the barriers to permanent housing. And not only are they going to be assessing the barriers, but they're also going to be assessing the resources. And they're going to be using the social ecological model in order to assess the different elements that are affecting a client achieve permanent housing. From there, they're going to work with the client to develop a housing plan to reduce those barriers and increase their resources. And it's going to be important that the housing specialist does this in collaboration with the client, because one of the things that we know is that if the housing specialist or any type of provider doesn't do anything in collaboration with the client, the likelihood of those action plans to be successful are going to be very minimal. So once those housing plans are developed, then the housing specialist is going to be supporting the implementation of those housing plans. Now, one of the things that we know is that life happens. So how we get to this point might be changing from week to week, because people are moving, because conditions change. So one of the things that we're going to be teaching the housing specialist is to constantly be as not only supporting but assessing um, the client's progress in achieving the housing plan. That might be that sometimes we might have to start from point one in terms of assessing new barriers, identifying new resources to permanent housing, and that might go through the same process again. This means that this is going to be the most intense step that the housing specialists are going to go through. The final step is that of closing the case. A couple of things about this. How we're going to be teaching closing the case is from the implementation perspective. What that means is that what we're going to be asking housing specialists to do is that when they feel that the housing that they feel that the client is ready to close a case, that they conduct a final assessment to assess self-sufficiency, that the client is able to carry on the different elements of the housing plan without the support of a housing specialist, as well as that they have achieved housing stability to maintain housing. So, and based on those goals, they're going to be providing the final information and then closing the case. I want to call your attention to other possibilities, though. This does not necessarily reflect what your contractual agreements might be. So this might vary from agency to agency. Other possibilities for closing the case might be that you lost contact with the client and it's going to be necessary to close the case. In other times, it might be that the clients move out of state or move up north or outside of LA County. So that might entail that we close a case. And in some cases, the client might no longer want to be part of the housing services. And in that case, we would ask that you close the case as well. I want to remind you that this is not a contractual uh, guidance. Rather, this is more of an implementation from the certification program perspective. I'm not going to go into detail about this because I think most of you have this already. But within the housing services, the housing specialists are going to be implementing a lot of this, a lot of these topics that you see here, among them benefits assistance, mental health, substance use, medical care, and so forth. Sorry, I went backwards. So now that we know that, how are we going to be providing the certification program? We're going to be using mixed methods because, as I mentioned before, we don't want to have the housing specialist in a classroom for 7 days. We don't think that that's the most productive or effective way to uh, to teach skills or enhance the knowledge of housing specialists. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing online modules for them so that they can review a lot of the information online, and they're going to be conducting some type of quizzes, and I'll talk more about those in a minute. And that's going to be online. Eventually, we want to move so that they are doing this on their own, which is going to be more self-paced. At the beginning, during the pilot process, this might be more live interaction with me or whoever the housing specialist trainer might be. And the last component will be that of an in-person training, which is going to be about 3 days. And essentially, what we want to make sure that we are achieving, once again, we go back into the long-term goals that the housing has for the clients, right? Which is essentially permanent housing and housing stability. What this logic model is telling us, different from the previous one, is how are we going to equip the the housing specialist to achieve or to support the clients achieve this. So how we envision that is that, first of all, um, the City of Los Angeles Housing plus Community Access are going to be letting us know who is the eligible participant for this. In other words, what are the agencies, which we know already who the agencies are, but we need to know who from those agencies are going to be participating in that in the certification process. Take in mind that all the elements that I'm presenting here are part of the certification process. The second step is, once we have identified the agencies and the participants, all agencies have to go through this particular orientation, which is what you're going through. If if a participant belongs to an agency that didn't participate, that did participate in this particular agency, in this case, your particular housing specialist, then they're going to be able to move forward and register um, for the online component. If the participants' agencies did not participate in this orientation, we're going to ask them to participate in one way or another, whether it is a one-on-one or whether it is, once again, in a group level overview, once again, that we might have to reschedule for those who couldn't attend. But it is imperative that upper management participates in this type of uh, orientation so that you all know how to support your staff and you know what they're going to be going through. So let's say, for the purpose of this, that the participant is already registered. So the next step is that they're going to go online through the prerequisite. They're going to be going through about 5 different modules um, eventually they're going to be self-paced. Those particular modules, and hopefully I can show you at least one, those particular modules are going to have a set of activities as well as a set of quizzes that are going to be testing their knowledge. How we're managing this is, we don't want this to be a punitive process. Rather, we want this to be an encouraging process. So what we're doing with this is that we are having the participants that are going through the online modules achieve at least an 80% score on their quizzes. And each quiz is going to be about 5 questions only, and they're going to be based on the information that they just reviewed. However, if the participant doesn't manage to get 80%, instead of punishing them for not getting the 80%, they can try as many times to try the quiz again until they get the 80%. Once they get the 80%, then they're able to go on to the next section. But if a participant is not able to complete all the tests, they're not going to be able to move forward to the registration for the face to face, and they're going to be asked to take the online prerequisite training again. And let me emphasize this: this is a prerequisite training. This is not optional for housing specialists. However, once a housing specialist has completed this, then they're invited to participate in the in-person training. During this in-person training, we're going to have different evaluation activities. During the pilot phase, we're mostly going to be focusing on knowledge and self-efficacy, as well as satisfaction, to evaluate the progress of participants in the certification process. Later on, as we continue to evolve in the certification process, we are going to be evaluating housing specialists individually as far as their participation in the training, as well as other elements that, as I mentioned, as we continue to evolve the program, we're going to be able to come up with those activities. So once they go through that evaluation, if they do not pass the evaluation, they're going to be asked to repeat the in-person training. If they do pass it, however, then they're able to get their certificate. So in essence, what you're seeing here is the complete picture of the certification program. You're seeing three elements. The first one is how the participant, when the participant is identified, how the organization is also participating in this. And how from there, we're moving on to the online prerequisite training that the housing specialists have to go through. We are going to extend the invitation to managers and coordinators to participate in this, and we're gonna talk to Maisha, Rebecca, and Brad to see if this is gonna be a prerequisite for them. However, for housing specialists, it is a prerequisite that they attend. So once they pass all those tests, then we'll extend an invitation to attend the in-person training. So what we're going to be measuring once again is in the online component. We're going to be measuring some of this knowledge and skills. So by doing that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be presenting part of the theory as well as modeling some of the activities, and they're going to get to practice as well as to test. So we're going to be measuring that. During the face-to-face, we're going to be providing an overview that is just going to be knowledge-based, as well as modeling either through trainer's demonstration or through case studies, and they're going to get a chance to practice and be observed by the facilitators, and they're going to be going through a series of tests in order to be able to demonstrate their skills. What we're going to be measuring in the online component, as I mentioned, is it's going to be 80% of that is going to be knowledge based, 10% of that is going to be analytical through case scenarios assignments and how they analyze and how they work with those potential clients, and also 10% of the skills. One of the reasons why we're doing the analytical and and the skills so low in terms of the percentage is because when it comes to online, it is harder to measure that. So we want to focus more than anything on the knowledge base online. In person, you can see that those components change, as only 20% of the knowledge will be evaluated during the pre and post. We're going to be try to focusing more on the analytical components as well as the skills components. How we measure or the instruments that we develop to measure those are going to be more the results of the pilots as we move forward with that. I'm not going to go into this. Those are just for ours. I can share the slides with you, but this is basically what are some of the variables that we're going to be looking at in terms of when we look at each of the topics that we're going to be covering throughout the certification process. So the next steps is that we'll be piloting all the materials that we have. So far, we have 90% done of the housing specialist online prerequisite training, and we also have the curriculum for the face-to-face. Where we are now is that they need to be trained with actual housing specialists so that we can get the feedback in terms of the flow, in terms of appropriateness of the content, and so forth. Once we gather all that information, the curriculum will be updated and ready to be rolled out, and trainings will be scheduled as necessary. So there's a couple of ways that this might happen. We haven't decided that yet as our conversations continue. But it might be that we have either a calendar of trainings or it might be on a needed base, because a lot of times we might have a trainings on a calendar, but if we don't have enough participants, we might not have we might not be able to do the trainings. So in some cases, we might have to just schedule trainings based on the need from the different agencies. With that, I conclude the whole overview of the training of the certification program. What I want to do now is I want to show you more or less where we are with the training with the housing specialist certification online. So when the housing specialists come, this is going to be where essentially what the landing page is going to be. Here we're giving a brief description of what they can expect out of this particular training. And as you can see here on the top, they're going to have different modules that they're going to be going through. One important thing to keep in mind is that as you see module 1A and module 1B, this is going to be the longest module. If at the end of these three sections, they're going to have the assessment. If they do not pass the assessment, as we mentioned with the 80%, they're not going to be given access to module 1B. And then we will do the rest subsequently. If the participant doesn't pass the assessment by 80%, then they're not going to be given access to the rest of the modules. But like I said, since this is not a punitive process, what they're going to be doing is they're going to be given the opportunity to retake the test on the same opportunity, so that they're able to pass the test, because what we're interested in is for them to take the knowledge. So they're going to have different modules here, and here we have also additionally module 5, which only has one section in assessment. What we're going to have essentially here, in addition to all of the modules, is we're also going to create a tab where the LA Housing sorry where the LA Housing and Community Investment Department has also resources that they want the housing specialists to access, so that it can be centralized, or we can provide additional materials that they might need in order to implement the housing services. So I just wanted to give you a quick glance of what they're going to be looking at. And I'm just going to go quickly into this. So for example, here you have module 1A or section 1. You'll see here that they have a brief blurb of the introduction to the module. Then they have the different objectives that they're going to be focusing on. Here, what you see right now is a placeholder, and don't look so much at the design right now. We're working on the design, but we're looking at this is a placeholder, but this is the PowerPoint presentation that they're going to be looking at. What we're hoping to move towards is to have automated video recordings, so that so the participants can watch it on their own. And these are going to be anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes or 2 to 5 minute videos. We don't want to make them too long. And based on that, they can start doing other games to practice what they just learned. So let me see if this works. So we have here different components, and basically what you have to do here is you look at the different statements that you have here, and what you're doing is you're going to be dragging it to match it with the response. So for example, here it says the HAPA program funds housing assistance and supportive programs for all homeless individuals in all 50 states and the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. So if you notice, I see the word truth here. So I'm going to try to match it. Let me see if it does. I'm going to try to match it. And if it matches, it would automatically erase it. But as you can see, it didn't match it. So I would have to look for the word false, which is somewhere around here. And then what would happen, that would actually erase that particular option. But what we're hoping to do here with this particular game is that housing specialists get the chance to practice what they know without making it too cumbersome, without making it too labor intensive for them. So if they're competitive, they can also see the timer here to try to resolve this as quick as possible. So that's just an example. Then they will go into section 2, where they will repeat the process and go over another section of content. And based on that video, they can either we're gonna have different experiences here. They can either have the matching or other types of games. And let me just quickly browse down. But eventually, Once you finish all three sections, what we're going to ask them to do is to fill out this particular quiz, and we're going to ask them to first input their email address, and then we're going to be asking them to, based on the information that they just went through, assess the different questions that we have here. And once they're able to answer all the questions and they're able to submit their response, then they'll be able to see whether they got an 80% or more. If they get an 80% or more, they're going to be given access to this particular module. If they do not, they're going to be given the opportunity to take the test again. But that's just a quick glance that I wanted to give you. I want to go ahead and go back to this. So based on what I just presented, based on the certification um, program as well as the online, are there any questions that you all have that I can answer at this time regarding regarding the certification program? Feel free to unmute your phones at this time.
I don't have any.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I have any at this point.
I don't either.
Well, you guys are making my job easier. I think what we're looking to do in the future, because I didn't talk much about what the role of the decision makers is going to be in participating in this, is that we want to make sure that you all are involved in part of the process as well. So what I'm hoping to do is that next year we're able to do a similar overview, but maybe of a more updated version, where we can have perhaps the opportunity to talk about what are some of the challenges that you have faced as an agency, so that we could possibly develop resources, so we can talk about what are some of the potential opportunities. Do you all feel that that's something that might work for you all?
I do.
Oh, sure. Yes, that will work.
See, I'm telling you, you guys are making my job easier. Well, with that said, I know that you guys have my contact information. At the very least, you have my email information. So if you have any questions of any kind, please go ahead and feel free to email me. Take in mind that I'm not in my office today or tomorrow. I will be returning to the office next week. If there are no further questions, I want to thank you for your time and being patient with the technology. Um, and I will talk to you soon.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
Alfred.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Come on.
Bye.